Hi, today we're going to be talking about what the actual difference is between wet, dry, mix, and parallel processing. All of these things seem to be similar, and I'm going to explain exactly what the situation is between all of these various terms. Hi, my name is Tyson. I'm a mastering engineer here at Dinosaur Dog Mastering, and before I dive into the content of explaining what mix dry is, I want to let you know I have a free mixing checklist available for download. It is the ultimate mixing checklist. So if you want better, faster mixes, make sure that you're getting that in the description of the video. It's the first link. We'll let you download that guide for free. Okay, with that said, let's dive straight into the content of what the actual difference is between wet and dry and mix and parallel processing and what all of these terms actually mean. Mix knobs, wet and dry, and parallel processing. We're gonna break all of that down for you today. It's actually much more simpler than it sounds. There's just a lot of vocab involved. So what we have here is a drum track, and I'm going to be using this drum track to explain all of these various elements. So let's start with wet dry, because that's probably the most common thing you see, and most often you see it with reverbs. To try to break this down for you as simply as possible, wet dry is simply the direct signal versus the processed signal with that plugin. So for example, this particular reverb has a dry percentage and a wet percentage. So if I do it 50-50, like so, that means that we have exactly 50% of the dry signal coming through and 50% of the processed signal coming through from this reverb. So we can just listen to that. All right, and then if we have 100% dry, that means there is no actual processing of this plugin that's coming out of our monitors. Or if we want 100% wet. All right, so pretty straightforward, very simple. Don't need to spend too much time on that. In other plugins, so for example, this Lustrous Plates reverb, you have an actual wet dry knob here. So this is going to be 100% dry, 100% wet, etc., and then everywhere in between. Also, this could also be known as a mix knob. It's the same exact thing that happens. So now let's talk about parallel processing. And this mostly comes up when you're talking about compression. So let's pull up our compressor here. There's really no difference between all of this stuff. Parallel processing is anything other than 100% wet or 100% dry. This compressor, for example, has a mix knob. And so the same exact thing applies that we just talked about. Essentially, the input is the direct sound or the dry sound, and then the output is the wet sound or the processed sound by whatever plugin we're using. So this would be 100% wet in terms of using this compressor. So let's quickly dial in some very aggressive compression, and then we'll talk about parallel. Okay, so now we have some very aggressive compression. We're gonna talk about parallel compression. So this is a form of parallel compression. A lot of times when people talk about parallel compression, they're actually talking about sidechain compression, which is, yes, a form of parallel compression, but in essence, the truest form of parallel compression is we have the dry signal and the compressed signal both being present inside of the mix. So because this compression is so aggressive the way that I have it dialed in, I probably don't want 100% of the wet signal coming out or the 100% of the processed signal. And so if I back this off to say 30%, I'm getting some of that emphasis and that thickness from the actual compressor, but I'm not going to be over processing it, so I still maintain a lot of the original dynamics. I'm going to start at 100% processed, and then I'm going to back it off to about 30, which I think is going to be about right. And you'll be able to feel that we still have some of that
oomph to the drums from this compressor, but we don't have all of the squashing of all of the transients, etc. So here we go. Here's 100% processed, and then we'll back it off. Okay, so here is without any compression. So it just adds, again, a little bit of that thickness. It's really nice. So that is essentially parallel. Technically, you could talk about reverb in the same way. If you have some of the dry signal and also some of the wet signal, you're processing it in parallel. That is correct, although you don't really hear that term used very often. But in essence, all of this stuff breaks down into, it's one single concept. We're trying to get both the dry sound and the wet sound both coming out at the same time so we can get benefits from both without over processing one or the other. I hope this was helpful in breaking down a little bit more of what it means, what mix knobs are, what it means dry and wet, and then also what processing in parallel actually means in practice. Thanks for watching this video. If it was at all helpful, don't forget to subscribe, as I release videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to help you get more professional mixes. All right, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.